one thing that's really good about a growing company, when you're growing fast, what you've got the advantage of doing, you're employing more people so you can delegate. What you do is you actually find out, or you define what you really want to do, or the other people around you want to do, and what they don't want to do. So every time you take on a new person, you come up with a big list of all the things that everybody doesn't want to do, and you tend not to do them that well because they always go to the bottom of the pile and sometimes get ignored. So the beauty of growing, you make a compilation of all these things that various people don't want to do or don't do well, and then you go out and find somebody who that's their passion. They want to do that well. So because of the way we grew, we surrounded ourselves with people that had lots of passion of what they did, and because of that, they did it bloody well. Sometimes we would have to move people from outside their square. We had, quality manager. Where do you get a quality manager from? Well, we ended up getting I think it was a science or maths teacher that had a lot of the skills, and with a bit of training, and a key one is actually showing them that you have confidence in them and giving them something to do and have responsibility for. And most of the times people rose to the occasion. They actually did even better than we expected them to do. Although you have to be careful, you keep a reasonable close eye on them, and if you see them starting to fail or fall off the tracks, get in there and help, because the worst thing is when somebody's actually fallen off the tracks, they lose a lot of confidence, and it's very hard to get that confidence back again. So there's a lot. I could talk a lot about human resources things, what was interesting towards the latter stage of the company, we actually had strategic planning meetings. We were going 5 or 8 years, and we were just going for it. And then we thought, well, we better actually have an idea of where we're going, why are we going there, what do the people actually want to do, because they're on the ship too. And we went through quite an involved process over a couple of days, spending time on the traditional, what is our mission statement and stuff like that. And then we'd go away and find out a whole lot more information, talk with all our other staff, come back another couple of days, and after it was about 6 months and about 3 or 4 days full time, maybe more 6 or 8, we actually came up with the book, which was our sort of, and we had to try and keep it down to about sort of 10 pages, because a mission statement or a strategic plan is ideal if you really need to think, well, we want to be there in 3 years, just there. Not there. As a friend of mine says, if you don't know where you're going, any bus will get you there, which is quite true. And there's a lot of people, an opportunity will come up, but if you don't really know where you want to be in 2 or 3 years' time, you'll probably pick up the opportunity, and it might take you somewhere totally wrong. The worst trouble is, the other staff are going over here, and you suddenly find you're going over there, and it becomes a bit of a mess. So strategic planning and strategic objectives are very helpful to have. But what came out of that was a lot of understanding of we didn't really understand how we operated as a team. We didn't understand how different personalities work. So we ended up doing a lot of what they call team training. We actually probably led the world in team training stuff, because I remember sort of 5 or 6 years after we were doing this, the latest American academics come over and tried to tell us how to do this sort of things, and we've been doing that for years. But doing things like understanding the people profiles, what are they called, Myers-Briggs type stuff, and doing reverse role plays. It was quite interesting that my other managers or my other key people, that the factory manager, the CEO, the marketing manager, those sort of people, they were on one side of the chart and I was on the opposite side, and we did reverse role playing so that I had to try and act like they would act, and they were trying to act like I, and then we got a much better understanding of how we operated, and it actually, when we actually started evaluating teams and the dynamics of teams, we found that because we were all different, which is actually one of the reasons we were so good. The worst you can do is get and that's why a lot of people do, they get people to come and work with them, and they're on the same base as they are. And because of that, you don't get a balanced team, you don't get the whole gambit. Anyway, go back further stuff, because I've got away forever. We got to about 75 million turnover, second biggest electronics company in New Zealand at the time, behind Tate's. Navman was just starting to rise, so we're still bigger than them at the time. And unfortunately, one of our shareholders died. He was about 65. I'm not sure he died, and we got thrown into the situation. What do we do? You know, his family don't really want the shares. You know, they're worth probably quite a lot of money. There's no structure in New Zealand to sell it to. There's no, you know, we didn't know anything about stock markets and going public or anything like that. In the end, we'd already had people that had come to want to buy us in the past, and we had a drawer full of people that wanted to buy us that we just said, oh, well, we always looked at anything that came in, you know, would they add something to the business, you know, if they bought into the business, and if they didn't really add something other than maybe money, we decided, because money is, well, if you're profitable enough, you can usually get it. Although the interesting thing is, and side diversion here, banks. Banks are not your friend. Banks are not there to help you. Banks are there to help themselves. And banks will typically only lend you up to the amount of asset that you have to put on the block, i.e. a house. They're not interested in your plant, equipment or your stock. They are only interested in property. They will give you their umbrella when it's fine and they'll want it back when it rains. So, you know, banks are not your friends. They're a very important part of the whole requirement, but they are not there to help you. They are there to help themselves. So don't forget that. So going back, the shareholder died, and we opened our drawer and we brought out the various people that we then approached, ones that we thought would probably be of interest that might want to buy his shares. In the end, the company that came back and we had a really good negotiation with was a company that was our agent in Australia, and we were their agent in New Zealand. We were competed against each other in Malaysia and Singapore, but you know, they knew our business and they were, you know, trying to become more vertically integrated, so they wanted to have more. They were a battery manufacturer, and of course we sold power supplies that charged batteries that ran telephone exchanges. So they wanted to be more vertically integrated. So in the end, they came along and said, "Oh, we like to buy his, but really we want to buy the lot." Oh, want to buy the lot. So we, you know, had to sit back. Do we really want to sell the lot? You know, and in the end, we thought, well, another one of our shareholders was about the same age, 65. You know, he would have to start thinking of where to next. You know, so and it was getting fairly big by then, and some of us had sort of slightly different agendas that we'd like to. And when somebody comes along and they ultimately offered us about 12 years profit in one day, and we mulled over, we negotiated, we had various little bits and pieces. We won't get into all of those, but in the end, we basically said, "Yep, we'll take it." It's quite an interesting process to go through with lawyers and stuff, you got to watch lawyers. They all start talking to each other, theirs and ours, and they try to make things far too complicated. And the number of times we had to step in and say, "Oh, hold on a minute, we're trying to do this. You know, just document what we're trying to do. Don't get all cute with each other and try and score points." Because all they do is they clock up bigger and bigger bills. That's what they're trying to do. So in the end, we sold to this company. I had a 2-year sort of workout, and other guys had 3. Because we had an earn-out arrangement, we basically managed the company for a couple of years with their people helping. You know, they sent over their accountant and stuff that worked with us. But at the end of the day, you know, they become typical large corporate. They were part of a 10 billion pound English company or something. So, you know, when we're used to just gung-ho, we want to do something, we go for it and do it. It was, you know, it's a bit bloody hard working and having to justify things to some silly accountant, and accountants want to justify everything. Like, we had a broad product range. They could only justify having 3 or 4 of the products from a pure volume and the volume of product and the profitability. The other products, as far as they were concerned, we should stop making. So they rapidly did stop making them, which was actually quite good, because about 3 or 4 years later we set up another company, and the aim of that company was to make all these little products that the other boys didn't want to make, and that's what we started doing. But Because we started doing that, we started trying to sell it through the old company, then we started selling it direct to customers, but then those customers would come back and say, we like that, but do you make the mainline stuff as well? And we said, well, we don't, but we could. So we ended up starting to make them. And of course, because they narrowed down the product range that we used to have, it gave us a window of opportunity to get back into the same business again, which we did. And we did it really fast because we're quite lucky at that stage, because all of the people around the world knew the key people of Switchtech. And they had a rapport, relationship. And when we come along and said, hey, we've got one of those too, they would try one for a few months and then say, here's an order for 1,000. Whereas when we were at Switchtech, they would try one for 6 months, then they'd buy 2 of them and try that for 6 months. 3 years later, you got to the point where maybe you can start to shift some volume. And that there goes to nearly every market. As we were growing, we would grow and get into one market space. And like we started in New Zealand, then we decided to go to Australia. It took about 3 years before we started getting significant volume. And then, of course, about 2 years after being in Australia, we headed off to Malaysia. And and it took about 3 years before we got significant volume there. But you got to put your toe in the water, and it takes time to build relationships. And people say, oh, but they can speak English. You'll just get in there and it'll all happen. It doesn't all happen. You've still got to build a relationship. It's probably more important with the Asian, the Chinese, and the Thais, and it's the relationship first, business second. And it's interesting, you've got to try and understand the cultures. We tend to just say, well, bloody buy it, it's the best things in sliced bread. And they want to build a relationship first before they buy anything. So it is different. And of course, some cultures, like the Asian cultures, you've got to make sure they can save face. The face to them is more important than just about anything else. Whereas we, us Kiwis anyway, don't really have much concept of face. Because I'm an engineer, not an entrepreneur. Well, I've become an entrepreneur, but I started as an engineer. Yeah, okay, so after we sold over a period of sort of 6 months, I ended up with a dollop of about $25 million that needed a home. Paid off the mortgage and a few other things, but it's just like winning lotto, really. And mind you, did a lot of bloody hard work to get it, but so. At that stage, Jenny Morrell was trying to set up a venture capital fund along the same lines as happens in America. And she invited me, mainly because I had some money. All I've been doing, I actually invested in a little business she was trying to help in Wellington a few years earlier. But so she got hold of me and people like Stephen Tyndall and Hugh Fletcher and another. And we set up a bit of an advisory board, and she did most of the legwork, but we advised a bit where we felt we could. And she set up this fund, got about $28 million, and we set about giving it away, well, not giving it away, but investing it in usually about sort of $3 million dollops into various companies to try and grow companies. The first time round, that first fund, we weren't very successful. The second fund, we've been a lot more successful. The problem with the first fund, because we were green, we thought what you invest in is really clever technologies that's going to really take the world by storm. Not a good idea. You can have the best technology in the world, but if you don't have the right people, it goes nowhere. And in a lot of cases, we invested in companies that were run by people that really weren't prepared to delegate. They were these sort of people that have only ever worked in small organisations or worked by themselves, or they'd closeted themselves with only a few engineers. They'd never really seen the real world. And to try and convince them to, we've now got the company to this size, now you have to stand aside and we'll put somebody else in as CEO. Oh, not a good idea. Yeah. So out of that, the important thing was the people, even the right people with an average idea, and don't forget this Innitel that I've started up since Switchtech, we were basically making products that just filled in the gaps that the big boys didn't want to make. They were good products, but they were amongst the best in the world, but they really weren't world beaters. But we had a bloody good little company. It grew pretty good, and in recent years, we've been actually applying, again, some of the technologies to different areas, like in our inner solar. and we now have a product, and because in the telecom we had all this monitoring requirement, we incorporate that into all solar, so that there now differentiates against the big boys, and we can actually fit it, and we can proudly say that we are, among the leaders of the world in that area, not in volume, but in technology and capability. So, it's the people that make the difference in a way, not the product. So, if you really want to go somewhere, you've got to understand what you're good at and be prepared to stand back or stand aside and maybe become like I am. I ended up being technical director. I wasn't even engineering manager. I gave that job away to somebody that could manage properly. And I was sort of, as technical director, I would sort of do a lot of what I called foresight marketing, trying with my knowledge of technology, double in the knowledge of the drivers of where the world's going, like people getting older, the CO2 problem, security, the drivers of the world, to look at that and come up with technologies that would give us something to market. Most of the stuff we've developed uses really existing technologies. We don't develop solid state devices. We don't develop clever ceramics that do things. We use them, but we use them in a clever way that's cost effective and in a market niche that we can. New Zealanders are really good in what would, on the whole, are small market niches. If it's a big niche, somebody will come and take it off you. One of the big boys will take it off you and just kill it. But if you're in a relatively worldwide small niche, and up to 100 million, still a small niche in the world scheme of things, then you can actually grow a pretty big company and actually still be only a little niche player. But if you're going to do something, you want to aim to be the best at that. And if you want to grow a decent sized company, forget about New Zealand. It's a good trial market. Actually, we're good at being early adopters, but you're never going to grow a very big company in New Zealand. So I know I started off at Tate's doing just New Zealand. By the time we left Tate's, we were in a good percentage of the countries in the world, and Switchtech started in New Zealand, but very quickly went worldwide. Blimmin' Inatel, we basically started without a New Zealand market. We were just exporting. But that's experience and know-how. So that, and the venture capital, I even set up my own little business incubation centre, which we tried for a few years with varying degrees of success, where we had a few extra people. Bill Lee, that you guys might bump into, he was one of them. And because we actually employed him because he was a good pragmatic business sort of manager, understanding accounts and stuff, whereas I was a bit too gung-ho over here, but we balanced each other really well. And we actually deliberately went out to find a person that would balance me, because having two people on the same base as me is not a good idea. And in there we were trying to help little startup companies that weren't big enough to have a marketing expert or an accountant or somebody to help them do the business plans, and it was sort of reasonably successful. We never grew any big companies out of it, although one of them that I bought into, and most of the companies that I've had that have done well, I've actually got in the middle of, from a technology point of view. I come up with a clever technology with a few other key guys around me on the technology side, and I grabbed the other people. Actually, Inatel was, what happened is I had this little electronic company that wasn't going anywhere, and I got a friend of mine to have a really good look at the staff to find out what their capabilities were, and I found they weren't really as capable as I thought they were. And about that same time I was doing something for the New Zealand Army in the LAVs, power supply, and the old boys came back and said, we've been looking around for a business for a while and we haven't found one, how about we have another go? So I already had a production company that they effectively brought in, we changed its name, and away we went again. But even the number 8 ventures, the venture capital fund, the first ones we invested in were very successful. The second lot have been a lot more successful because we have a much better understanding now of what's needed in a company, and at times you've got to, as a board, get very heavy. It's quite interesting. At Switchtech we didn't have a board, Tate didn't have a board when I was there, but at Inatel we decided to have a board right from square one. It's actually very important. It's very important to have some people on the board that are independent. They may still be shareholders, but they have to not work in the company, because you can get too close to it and not see the wood from the trees. So it's actually having, independent, people on the board is very good. You can have advisory boards, but it depends on whether you treat them as if they were board members. In other words, if they all voted against you, then most of the time you'd probably go with them. So it is quite important that you get the best and you listen to the best. You don't just use them when you want to, because sometimes they'll say things you don't want to hear. And another thing on a board or something, cover your bases. At times, even I personally don't think much of accountants and solicitors. I consider them as being parasites, but they are a very necessary evil. If you're running a business, you have to have an understanding of what could go wrong in the law or what could go wrong in the accounting. If you get your accounts wrong, the blooming tax man will sink you. If you don't die because your cash flow is no good and you die run a cash. You've got marketing and sales people, bring them into the group because they've got a lot to contribute, but be wary. They have a really good understanding of what the market wants today and the customers want today. I'm a bit different. I have a good understanding of technology and I keep up to date with what technology is doing and what the drivers of the technology and what the drivers are of what the customer wants. Now, but the salesmen tend to see what the customer wants today. And of course, designing a product or creating a service or whatever for what the customer wants today in a fast-changing world, by the time you get in the marketplace, you're behind the eight ball. You're becoming a me too. So I've always sort of worked a bit differently. I'm trying to double guess where we're going to be in 2 or 3 years' time and then do it now. I'm probably quite lucky. I'm confident enough in my own abilities that I can normally achieve it. There's an interesting thing and I have a lot of trouble with people like accountants who if you're starting a business or you're doing something, then you've got to know what the answer is. In other words, if you can come up with a business case or a design brief, Gantt chart your design process of we've got to have this by then, and this is in 3 months' time we'll have a finished product. It's the problem with design is you've got so many unknowns, and it's difficult to put a timescale on an unknown. And if you decide, yes, I want to build a new Butte X, you can define what you think you want, but as you start, and you won't know whether you'll be able to 100% achieve it because there's a lot of unknowns. And as you move forward, you will find, well, as you start off, you'll know maybe 50% of the answers, but as you move forward, you've got to tick off more and more of the unknowns. And every now and again, you'll find, oh dear, I've gone the wrong way. There's a big showstopper here because really it's not going to work for these reasons. You've got to be honest with yourself and say, hey, and raise the flag, even though the management that you work under might say, well, what do you mean you can't do it? Well, if you flog a dead horse for long enough, they'll know you can't do it and they'll be mighty pissed off that you've spent the last 6 months flogging a dead horse where, in hindsight, because everybody loves hindsight, you could see that 6 months ago you'd got to the point where really it's not going to fly. So, and it's interesting that one of the guys that I worked with for years sort of said, I was an odd person. I always come up with, well, not always, but most of the time I come up with a brilliant design. But, I'd start with 10 ideas and he would start with one. And he would start, on the whole, would come up with, not a bad, product, but I'd usually come up with a much better one because I'd sort of quickly refine down from my 10, down to 2 or 3, really worked on those 2 or 3 sort of in parallel and then finally settled on one and got it past there. And as well as that, I was honest with myself to say, hey, I've gone the wrong way. This one's not going to work. Okay, well, that's not going to work. Why? Okay, we'll try this other and quickly change tack because failing quickly is very important. Because if you take a long time to decide you're actually failing, all you're doing is burning up time, burning up money. Time's important in a lot of products and services because they only have a window of opportunity. If you get there too late, you've missed your window of opportunity. So failing early and deciding to go somewhere else is very important, and to admit it at the end. People sort of, oh, you failed, but being open and honest is very important. People starting out, in other words, you've gone through your university, You may or may not have had much work experience. I probably advise that you, probably if you can, well it is difficult in New Zealand, but if you can, get a job with a larger company to start with. Something that has a broader range of people in it so that you can see accountants, you can see salesmen, you can see what, get an understanding of what other people can bring to a business, because any business that's a bit bigger has had to develop those. If they haven't, they've died. And having an understanding of those attributes that people bring to your business mean that when you start your own business, you'll know have an idea of what your own shortcomings are and what other people do, because you don't have to be a very big business before you have to have other people. One man can only do so much. And if you've got one man like me, I can come up with the cleverest product in the world, but I couldn't sell it to anybody. I probably can make it, not that effectively, but I can make it. But salesman, I am not. Well, it's interesting. I know that don't do that. I'll divert too much. What else? When you decide to start up with your company, you've got to make sure of what you want to do. You've got to aim to be the best in the niche that you're going to be in, not just a me too. Because if you're me too, you no sooner get in there than the other boys will just wipe you out. If you think you've got something that's really good and you could take on a big boy, you've got to think, what could that big boy do to stop us getting traction? And one of the things he can do is drop his pants, i.e. drop the price to a quarter of what it used to be, and then the answer is, well, crikey, I can't make it. But he doesn't mind making a loss for a short time. He'll kill you. So, but if you've got something that differentiates yourself that they can't get from the other guy, you've got a chance. Although the other thing you've got to watch though, and I know some guys that had some really clever stuff that they took to America, it was really, really great in the I think in a modem field or something, competed against some of the big boys. It was better than the big boys, but they got no traction at all. And when one of the big boys brought out a product that was actually lesser than theirs 3 years later, it took off like bonfire. So, and it's interesting seeing, again, a culture thing. Americans like buying off Americans. French and Germans want to buy off French and Germans. They're not interested in buying off somebody else. Trouble is in New Zealand, which is a bit of a problem we have, New Zealanders on the whole don't like buying from New Zealanders, and we have the biggest culprit there is the government. They would rather buy some software off somebody in America than buy some software off a company in New Zealand, even though the New Zealander software is probably the best in the world in their niche. But oh no, because anyway, we won't fight that battle. But you've got to be careful. Even though you've got to watch, the best one doesn't always win, and the competition can be devious. They can badmouth you. They convince the customer in some way that So it's think of what the response will be from the competition. Don't just blindly think, oh, we've got the best thing, therefore we're going to knock them over. Doesn't happen. Normally doesn't happen.